Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Doc Anderson, Brian Birdwell, and Kyle Cassell. Gentlemen, thank you again for being here. I thought we would start with the news of the week, which is health care. You may have seen that a couple days ago, Governor Rick Scott, a Republican of Florida, made the decision that he would take advantage of the opportunity to expand Medicaid. He had previously been skeptical about the desire of some folks in his state to have him do that. And so that leaves Governor Perry, our governor, as the lone holdout among the big state Republican governors on Medicaid. You know that we have 5.8 million uninsured Texans, 23% of our population. The amount of money that would come to us if we expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act is considerable. And I know all of us are compassionate people. We don't want to see people go without in this state. Representative Anderson, with that many people uninsured in Texas, why should we not follow Governor Scott and Governor Kasich and Governor Snyder in Michigan, Governor Kasich in Ohio, Governor Snyder in Michigan, other Republican governors, and expand Medicaid, take advantage of those federal dollars?
Thank you, Evan. And let me say first, before we get started, I also want to thank Baylor for hosting this event, and Judge Starr and his lovely wife Alice for their leadership here, and Evan, the Texas Tribune. We sure appreciate this opportunity.
Yes, sir.
The total numbers, I think it's dropped down to about 20 now states who have opted not to join the ACA as far as the exchanges, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And that's a shifting paradigm, and we'll see how that goes forward. What we're charged with as policymakers,
Yep.
we need to take the R's and D's off the table and actually look at, we need to make sure that we establish and make provisions for a system that's sustainable and that will be cost effective, and most importantly provide a good quality of health care.
Yep.
That's the goal.
Right.
When we look at numbers, a lot of numbers thrown around, and you mentioned that Texas is one of the largest as far as the uninsured population. We really need to look at that number. It's not a homogeneous group. 30% of those folks make over $50,000. And 1 million of those make over $75,000. And 1/3 of those are non-citizens, illegal or legal, which doesn't make a difference. And so we need to, as we go forward, make sure that we're dealing with issues that are germane and we know which process works the best. The main concern I have is that the ACA, as it's currently written,
Yep.
and it's no criticism of our president, this is the law, we have to work within the system, but we need to make sure, we're charged with making sure the system works. It's not a matter of take the money and run. We need to look not just a short run, but we need to look at the long run, make sure we help solve this problem and provide sufficient health care.
Yeah.
Currently, we're seeing some disturbing trends in Medicaid, wherein the numbers are actually deteriorating as far as quality health care, and there's 70% of the physicians currently, and we met with probably about 70 or 80 physicians, and are currently not taking new Medicaid.
Right. So the system itself may not be working as well as it ought to.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing that's important is that as we go forward, we need to make sure that we don't cause any harm and that we actually improve things. And so if 70% of the physicians currently are not taking new Medicaid patients before any expansion, where we are currently,
that's significant.
That is significant. And these folks also are saddled with tremendous, particularly sole proprietors. They go home at night and they have a couple hours they have to work on trying to get all the records straight. And, and so as we go forward, and we'll visit on these issues, I'm sure, we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing and do no harm.
Right. Senator Birdwell, I looked up the amount of money that would come to your individual districts, just your districts, if the Affordable Care Act provision to expand Medicaid took place. $235 million between 2014 and 2017 in Representative Anderson's district, $254 million in Representative Cassell's district, $760 million to your Senate district if we expand Medicaid. Now, obviously, there are consequences of doing that, as Representative Anderson talks about, but that's a lot of money to leave on the table.
The question is, how are the dollars arriving and what's the structure in which they are arriving? To use that example, let's just take a household. If I have that many million of dollars show up on my doorstep and just get to say, oh great, look at all the money I get to spend without worrying about what are the consequences of what I've signed up for. Look, here's Here's the real brutal truth and difficulty that we're dealing with. While our doctors and our medical profession are worrying about remaining solvent now, Doc, Kyle, and I are trying to make sure the state remains solvent.
Right.
The TMA's come out and said we want expansion with reforms. There's a very difficult problem with that. We have to sign up for expansion and hope for the reform.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You first, buddy. Is
Right.
what we're really getting at.
Right.
There are issues with block grants that would give us some freedom of maneuver. Let me give you a little bit more background, if I may.
Sure.
I'm not trying to filibuster here, because I know that on our side of the building that happens a lot. But
That's all right. This is true.
But I want to deal with you with the rigor that you've asked.
Yeah.
Right now, Medicaid is generally a 60-40 split. State dollars through a state taxing structure. 40 cents of every dollar we spend on Medicaid comes through a state taxing structure that never goes to Washington.
Right.
60% right now, about 57-43 is the split right now, of where Medicaid eligibility folks are right now. About 57 cents of every dollar goes through Washington, comes back. So you have to send 75 cents to Washington to get your 57 back. And that's part of the enticement, is sign up for this to get your dollars back.
Yeah.
When the stimulus dollars were being negotiated or discussed back in the 09 session, federal government actually changed the distribution from 60-40 to 70-30 to entice the states, but it's gone back to
60-40,
60-40, 57-43.
Right.
And in fact, already you're seeing in some of the budget negotiations between the legislative and executive branch federally to not only combine Medicaid and CHIP, or S-CHIP as we call it here in the state, but then begin reducing those dollars. So you're already seeing the discussions of reducing the amount of dollars that the state will get. Here's the problem. If I sign up right now under the auspices of 100% reimbursement rate, that'll go to 90 after 3 years, I still have no guarantee that some additional ornaments are going to get hung on this Christmas tree that we didn't sign up for.
Right.
Just like in 65 when Johnson signs the act, we signed up for it in 67. In 72, nursing homes get added to that. One of the things we were very cognizant with last session was making sure that nursing home funding was still going to be sufficient to ensure that we didn't have a population of senior citizens.
So you're worried,
now.
Senator, that what the deal you're being offered now will not be the deal in 5 years?
Yeah, it's like, okay, just to use a very basic analogy. Here's state of Texas, here's your baby elephant. We're going to feed it with you for about the first 3 years. But the elephant's growing up.
Right, and then you're on your own. You're eventually going to be on your own.
Right, yeah. But here's the problem with what Rick Scott talked about. When I heard his quote 2 days ago on radio, and it was generally, I cannot in good conscience not sign up for it as long as the federal government's paying 100%. But when the federal government begins to retract, they've already told us 90%, and the negotiations are already going on about going lower than that. What I cannot change is the expectation you've created in the minds of the citizens is that they'll get something for no cost, that 3 years or 4 years from after we've signed up for it. How does the state retract when the federal government retracts?
Right, got it. Now, Representative Casale, I've heard two very strong rejoinders here. I know I'm going to get one from you, but let me come at this a different way. As I understand it from your mayor, the uncompensated care cost this county $100 million every year. That is people who show up at emergency rooms and don't have insurance. We know that people who go to emergency rooms to get primary care is the most expensive and least efficient delivery of care that you can have. $100 million a year for this county alone. That's itself, in the other respect, a big enticement to solve the problem somehow.
You know, I've attacked this issue a number of ways.
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to visit with the mayor and the chamber and Glenn Robinson at Hillcrest. But, you know, this week I made it a point to go visit with Chairwoman Colcorst. And yesterday afternoon I had the opportunity to go sit down with Senator Armbruster in the governor's office.
Yep.
And, you know, I keep going back to some facts. Lois was clear to point out that if we do absolutely nothing, we drop the number of participants by 10%, which is huge. Two, listen to Senator Armbruster, Governor Perry's not budging.
Yeah.
You know, and I keep going back to where Senator Birdwell was leading us. It's our money. I have faith in our local folks here to make the right decisions.
Right.
And I do not trust DC dictating or telling us how to utilize this money.
So you'd like
or do
them, Representative, you'd like the government to give us the money that they would give us under the Affordable Care Act, but with no strings attached, and let us figure out the best way to spend it.
I hope I heard you right, but what I would, I'm going to clarify and say the money that we put in from the state of Texas needs to come back to the communities.
Right.
You know, when I'm in Waco, and I'm going to jump to 2 other programs, education and water, what the mayor's done and what the education summit's done around here locally. I know that the medical community here can perform just as well on their own with their own finances.
Senator.
May I jump in and add one more thing?
Please.
Because Kyle's going down the right road here. Part of the problem with the structure we have with Medicaid and the state's lack of freedom of maneuver is we are being asked to budget something that we cannot define the limits of by virtue of what the federal government tells us we have to do. Give you the example. I don't hand a credit card to my son and say, go out and have a nice time Friday night, and I'll just figure out how to pay for whatever it is you buy. I hand him $50, $20, $10, whatever it is, based on what he's doing, and say, here's your limit. Anything beyond that is yours. With Medicaid, our problem is we budget in the state to say, here's what our expected volume of customers using this program are. Here are the dollars we put against it. Unlike S-CHIP, where we get to say, here's the cap, and after that's done, it's done. There's no more expenditure. Medicare is not that way. For every person that shows up and says, makes a demand on Medicaid dollars, we have to pay for it. Meaning, I can say, here's $1 billion for Medicaid. But if we've got a customer base that goes out and expends $1.2 billion,
it's going to cost you more. And then where's the money going to come from?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Doug.
Yes, absolutely. And the mayor's absolutely right. You know, statewide, it's $5 billion in uncompensated care. What we're concerned about is that this will actually drive that figure higher because if there's less physicians accepting Medicaid currently, like before the expansion, and there's what they call a woodworking effect, where more, as we go forward, there's more and more folks who are eligible now but not using this come forward. That drives the need up, but the access is diminishing.
Right, because of the number of doctors.
Because of the numbers. So the quality of care goes down. Where do those folks go?
Yeah.
Go to the emergency
They're going to
room,
go to the emergency room.
which is the very issue we're trying to solve in the first place.
Got it.
And so there's a limited capacity, or safety net, and we're going to overload that safety net with 1.5 million more people.
Okay.
In a scenario, we don't know what the parameters are. There's nothing, those funds that they're talking about are not set in statute, those discretionary funds. And they already have talked about things that it's looking at it like $1 trillion cost, so they're starting to scale back. Well, maybe we'll just go back to 90. And so, and history tells us, as the senator mentioned, that these things fluctuate. So as policymakers, we need to make sure that we don't put Texas on a fast track to bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that, yes, immediately we need to help solve this problem, but long term we need to help solve the problem.
All good answers in an important topic, but I want to move quick, fast, because of our time, from something controversial like healthcare to something non-controversial, public education. Representative Casal, you know that there is still, you were not in the 82nd legislative session when the votes were taken to cut public education by, depending upon how you view the issue, $4 billion or $5.4 billion was the amount that's discussed as underfunding public education. We had a school finance lawsuit make its way through the courts. 600 school districts were plaintiffs in this suit. Judge Dietz down in Austin found that the state system of funding public education was unconstitutional. Probably no surprise to anybody that he would rule that way. And so now the state will appeal. We'll be in 2014 before we have a resolution. But Judge Dietz says he thinks that the state may be on the hook, if this stands, for $2,000 per enrolled public school student. That would be $10 billion a year, or $20 billion of biennium that the state would have to come up with suddenly. It's a lot of money. I want to ask you, you're relatively new to the Capitol, but you watch these issues carefully. Do you think that we have an adequate system, contrary to what Judge Dietz says, of funding public ed?
Well, obviously we have an issue we need to solve. And I have taken the liberty, I look over here and I see my Region 12 guys, and I'm very thankful for all their help on this issue, visit with Chairman Aycock yesterday about HB 5, but we've got to find a way to fund the courts where we sit today. As a representative of a very diverse district, I have a number of school districts up here, but we all the way down to College Station and Bryan. Right. But I've got Mumford and Hearn and Calvert. I mean, we're just all
the
around.
Full range of kinds of districts.
It's just different issues, different problems. We've got to find a way to fund them. Right. But the responsible thing for us to do is, unfortunately, I want to jump out there and fix education and funding today.
It's weight.
We do not know where this appeal is going to head. What we're going to. It would be just crazy to jump out there and start on. We have to wait for the courts to find out exactly which way we head.
Are you open, Representative Casal, to putting more money back into public education?
Yes, sir.
Do you think that the cuts made by your colleagues here, they'll cover their ears, they won't listen, so you say what you think. Do you think the cuts made by your colleagues here on the stage last session were ill-advised, or do you agree with the decision to cut public ed as it was cut?
They did what they had to do. And, I'll make a shout out to Waco ISD and what they've done with Consolidated. I know Pat Aiken is here in the back, and they made some tough decisions. And then when I was here for the Education Summit, like I keep going back to local control, and I'm just amazed at what Waco does.
What they've been able to do under difficult circumstances.
They're very proactive. You've got a wealth of knowledge in this room, in this community.
Right.
And, with their help and guidance, we need to do what's right. Unfortunately, as a responsible representative, we're going to follow the court decisions,
you're gonna have
see
to
where
wait.
we're headed.
Right.
Yes, I'd like to jump out and fix it today, but let's be mindful of where we're headed and make sure we don't do something that's unconstitutional once again.
Senator, did you cut public education too much last session?
No, I don't think so. Your previous question to Kyle had two words in it, adequate and system, that because of those two words are really two different questions.
Explain.
Adequate meaning, are dollars getting into the school districts for them to be able to continue to execute their mission of public education? The answer to that's yes. The system that gets it there, I've got grave reservations with.
Okay.
I cannot explain. I've got 80 plus school districts within Senate District 22, running a wide range of per student funding from, as an example, Glen Rose, which is up in Somerville County, a property-rich district, but actually gets more money per student than what Waco does. And so the discrepancies of, and pardon the slang, the copper penny, the gold penny, the per student, and when you look at I can't explain it and I can't defend it.
Yeah.
How we've gotten to this system that is such a patchwork of funding that, of course, the district judge says is equivalent to a statewide property tax, and where we're going to be with the appeals process. I don't know what we'll end up doing, and I'm certainly most likely a special session at some point in 14. So the challenge is, when you listen to what we talked about with Medicaid expansion, I assume we're going to get to transportation. I assume we're going to get to water. We're already talking about the least controversial one as you used in your question. But you're seeing the pressures where, whether it's in the last 10 years, in creating an expectation that with the funding we were sending to public schools from 99-2000 year, where we were funding larger than enrollment growth, and then when our economy turns, people hang on to their dollars and you don't see as much revenue coming in, we had to make some very tough decisions that trickled down to the communities to make relative decisions to that said, like here what Waco had to do with closing campuses that didn't have enough teacher to population to facilities.
So, of course, Senator, the population of the state has grown dramatically in the last 13 years. We added 5 million people to the state's population between 2000 and 2010. We may now be up to 26.5 million. We're adding 1,000 people a day to the state's population. Part of the problem is that success has its own consequences, right? We attract people and the schools grow.
I do believe, though, that we will fund the increase in enrollment, so you'll see
at a minimum this session.
At a minimum this session. There may be some other structural concerns that we'll have to address. Again, the lawsuit's going to drive some of that, but we've got to wait for the courts to give us their vote before we go execute on that. So, but I understand the challenges. What I'm trying to express is the pressures of adequate funding across many spectrums of what a state is responsible for, and you're seeing those pressures, whether they're from federal or from the
state.
good news of state growth.
Now, Representative Anderson, I'm glad Senator Birdwell brought up the question of per-student spending. You know, there's always a comment in conversations like this, well, money is not the only answer to the problem of how to make public education better, but there certainly does seem, by my reading, to be a correlation. If you look at the TEA's rankings of schools, they rank schools exemplary, recognized, acceptable, unacceptable. The schools that are exemplary spend on average $1,000 more per student than the schools that are unacceptable. And each level that you go down, you know, they spend more, a little bit less, and the least. That seems to me to be at least partly a correlation between what we spend and the performance that we get. So shouldn't people be thinking about money as this very material component to the discussion?
Well, money is absolute, and those studies don't hold true absolutely because there's some schools that are getting less that actually perform well, but in general, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And we spend in Texas about $11,000 per student, roughly, local, federal, and state. We also, I'm concerned about growth there and unfunded bonding liability of $63 billion, which comes to about $15,000 per student in Texas. And we kind of got to look at the whole thing. It all comes out of the same pocketbook, and that is the taxpayer.
Right.
But my concern is to see if we have more equitable funding with the revenues that we have.
Rather than adding more money.
We may have to add more money. We definitely will fund the growth. I would, there's consensus. I would definitely vote for funding the growth.
Right. And you share Senator Birdwell, Representative Casal's sense that they're not going to do anything, you all are not going to do anything significant on this until after we know the resolution of the appeal.
And let me tell you why that's the case, because the lawsuits are not new to the education industry.
Right.
And for the last 40 years, you know, folks think that we go down there and fix education. We go down there, we fight the battle, we come up with a budget. Then, generally the districts sue, they go to court, and then it goes through the process, and then the judges tell us what we'll have to do, and then we respond to that edict.
Right.
This is no different. The one thing that's different this go-round, Evan, and what I'm hopeful about, is that in this lawsuit, there's another group joined that includes not just the districts asking for more money, which is the efficacy, adequacy issue that the senator was talking about, but that we look at other things, dropout rates, charter schools, other issues. And this group that joined the lawsuits is actually parents, taxpayers, small business people, teachers, and so they can bring a different value to that, and we'll see as the courts rule, and it'll probably go all the way through the Supreme Court, and then they'll come back to us, and then we'll have to see what happens. So this go-around, there's a lot more potential for change there that we have to deal with at the front end.
Makes much more sense to pause.
So it's prudent to go slowly, just like on the healthcare issue, to go slowly and let these issues ripen and try and see if we can address them.
Senator, you know, public education is not all about funding, and even if we can't deal with the funding issue this session, there are going to be other things in public education that will get people's attention, and already we're hearing a lot about standardized testing and accountability. I believe that now we're up to 95% of school boards around the state, representing 97% of students, have passed resolutions against the current system of standardized testing. Will you all just upturn the apple cart this session, do you think, and get rid of the STAR testing, get rid of the requirement that there be 15 tests, and get rid of the end of course exams counting for X percentage, and just start over, or are we going to see something more graduated?
I don't know. I think you'll see something graduated. To the depth of the graduation, I can't speak to a percentage of, but we already have passed in the Senate SB 135 that removed the requirement for schools to count the end of course exam as 15% of the grade. What you're seeing in taking a broader view of testing, you're absolutely right. We're spending so much time testing that it's become its own encumbrance as opposed to what are you teaching to get ready for those tests, so to speak.
Right.
I mean, I sat down with the superintendent in Valley Mills last year, and they laid out the calendar for me, and I was just aghast. I mean, from
how many days were taken up with teaching for the test?
It starts on April 15th, which I found very ironic, but they're basically testing from April 15th to Memorial Day. But one of the things in speaking with so many of my superintendents across the district is they're interested in, even if they can't get more dollars, give us some freedom of maneuver associated with the dollars we have. Whether it's testing where you're dealing with how we grade or rate with TEA, where instead of grading the mean or the average score, you grade based upon the least score, or other challenges that come with how much we are directing school districts. Because remember, the end of course exam isn't so much about how we want to value each individual student. It's to make sure we at the state level have a structure in place where we can evaluate our system, as opposed to evaluate the individual student. So there's a lot of places, to really get back to your question, we are looking at a number of things on the Senate side. I assume Doc and Kyle, y'all are on the House side, that will give some freedom of maneuver to school districts to really tailor what they do to their customers rather than being top-down driven from the state legislature.
Representative, we do want to have some way to know whether our schools are doing well, right?
Correct.
The people who are for accountability will tell you, and many of them were folks who were involved with passing No Child Left Behind. You know, there were good Republican folks like you all who, when George Bush was governor, said we've got to have a way to adequately measure, are our schools doing a good job or a bad job for the sake of the parents and the sake of the kids. You surely don't want to get rid of accountability.
No, but we got to give the schools some flexibility. One of my favorite superintendents is Stanley Harris out in Axtell, and that's a lot of tests. And Senator Birdwell alluded to the fact that these kids are taking tests every day, and the anxiety and the troubles they're having. They're not learning. All they're doing is worrying about these tests. So, and how many exams do we have to prepare them and evaluate this performance? And then they've got to go take the SAT or the ACT to get into college. Which one's not doing the job? Which one? I mean, I would hate to be back in high school now.
Yeah.
And, of course,
you got out just
more
in time, didn't you? That's it.
Well, this freshman year has been really tough. There's a lot of testing. And today I'm hoping for a nice solid B today. So
we grade on a curve. It's okay.
Good. But you look at the flexibility of the schools, and I see Dr. Stuckley and Dr. McCowan out there, and in District 12, the opportunity for jobs today are going to go through the community colleges. They're not going to go through the universities. I mean, we have thousands of jobs, and those kids cannot get on that career path at an early age, and that's troublesome. So, that's one of my priorities, is to help my district and these students have the opportunity to get out there and acquire the skill set to make a good living and move back to their communities and help them thrive.
Now, Representative Anderson, I want to move quickly from testing to choice. That's the other charm on the chime bracelet, as it were, in the debate over public education this session. Senator Patrick, Chairman Patrick, Senator Birdwell's colleague, has introduced the concept of choice. We haven't really seen specific bill language yet because we don't know if it's simply going to be open enrollment within the public education system or if it's going to involve migrating public tax dollars to parochial and private schools, which would be somewhat more controversial. This is not a new topic, but there seems to be some urgency now to give people more flexibility to move from bad schools to good schools. Do you think we'll see choice legislation pass of some sort this session?
I don't know if there's really consensus across the board. We like to keep all options on the table, and choice is one of those. But we'll have to see how that bill comes forward and what the actual debate is. But
the Speaker has said that he wonders whether the votes are there in the House for any kind of choice. You've heard him say that.
That's right. I don't see that there's consensus for that. But we have to, as we go forward, education is tremendous complex, and it's been alluded to. Year upon year, we just add some big omnibus bill and add just another layer. And so, but it's important to have parents involved in the process. I mean, most folks in education tell you that. It's important that we have some options, and if schools are failing, we need to address that. We can't just leave those kids locked in those schools. But what that format will take remains to be seen. Let me say one thing specifically on the testing. It is horrendous, and then the practice test on top of the other. The HB 5 that
Chairman Aycock's bill.
Correct. Chair of Education, and there's tremendous consensus for that. We'll go from 15 tests down to 5. So something more graduated, right? Which I think will be a
good deal.
And just a quick question in this whole scenario, just to put some context in it, as we go forward and as our government looks at the issues we're dealing with here and funding all these issues, we have to keep in mind that we're still in the worst recession in 75 years. Texas is better than all the others, and oftentimes we're insulated, and folks don't realize. Europe, that's 17 Euro members, Germany just announced last week that they're in a double-dip recession.
Right, so we have a lot to be thankful for as far as
absolutely, and so we have to look at that in the whole context.
Senator Birdwell, quickly on choice before we move on. The controversy I alluded to is really the center of the debate, which is do we take public tax dollars and allow parents to move them into private or parochial schools where they would not have the same accountability measures behind them as they would if they remain within the public ed system. A lot of people think that advocates for choice don't care about public education, because if they did, they would simply figure out a way to spend that money to make the public schools better, not to enrich the private and parochial schools. What do you say about that?
Well, it's not, to me, it's not a question about enriching private over public, because as a legislator, my number one responsibility is to the citizens of this state, and particularly the parents, to ensure they're the center of gravity and get to make the choices.
Yeah.
Now, the state constitution requires that I have to have a system of public schools for the diffusion of knowledge.
Right.
And if every parent in the state said, I'm taking my kid to a different school, I still have a constitutional requirement to have a public school system.
Right.
So affirming individual parents' ability to make those choices is something I'm always ready to go do. The challenge is, as complex as our current system is, I don't think you'll see you'll see some suggestions. I don't think you'll see, as Doc said, consensus on particular agreements, or this bill's going to go forward to do that, because we've already got such a patchwork of how we fund. It's really just adding another card to the house of cards. We've got to see how the lawsuit comes back.
Everything is related.
Everything's related. And so to add another ornament on the Christmas tree to a Christmas tree that's already holding too many ornaments, I think is fraught with some dangers that before we get too far down that road, we've got to make some structural changes to ensure that if we go down the road of parents making choices to leave bad schools, we've structurally got mostly very good schools, well-funded, adequately, fairly funded, and the like. Then we can make that an option when we get past that point. I don't think we're there yet, Evan.
All right. Before we open it up for questions, I do want to spend the last couple of minutes, and I may go a minute or two longer than planned, a moderator's prerogative, to talk about water and transportation, which are really, alongside public ed and healthcare, the big ticket, big issues of the session. We have a $53 billion completely unfunded state water plan over 50 years. We have a $315 billion road funding hole, by some estimates, to maintain the current roads we have in the state at the current level of congestion. But of course, the state is growing rapidly. We need more roads, we need better roads, and they're going to get more crowded just by necessity, right, by definition. There's a discussion of taking money out of the rainy day fund. Perhaps $2 billion for the water plan to jumpstart it. Chairman Williams is talking about as much maybe as $3 billion for the transportation plan. On the House side, that number may be lower. We have three small government conservatives up here on the stage, people who, by their own campaign rhetoric, have said for years, we don't want to spend money. But all of a sudden, we're talking about spending perhaps as much as $5 billion out of the rainy day fund to get these programs started.
Can I jump into this one first, if I may?
Yes.
Hey, I don't mind jumping.
Jump.
Hooah. When you say small government, it isn't simply measured by dollars. It's measured by function.
Efficiency.
Function.
Yeah.
Well, but you're right, Doc. Much of our spending problem that we're seeing at the federal level, and I'm going to get to your answer here, okay? But much of our problem at the federal level is because many things that clearly belong to the state or local were drawn to the federal level to be spent on. We can have this discussion at some other time, but waste in the federal government isn't solely defined by inefficiency, is what the federal government's spending money on, articulated as a requirement in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. So when we say small government, let's first make sure, while dollar amounts are an accurate measure of size of government, the first measure is what I'm being asked to do a proper role and function of government? Second, if the answer to that is yes, what level of government is supposed to do it? Now, having laid that out, water and transportation are absolutely requirements of the state. We have serious challenges that come with the growth. Give you an example. I mean, I've been digging into water in a great number of details because of Brazos Basin and how much of that I've got. Transportation, I've got more of Interstate 35 than anybody else in the state from a sense of mileage. So those are both very important to me because of the necessity of moving products, people, safely, efficiently throughout the state to continue to enjoy the great commerce that Texas is enjoying, and having the water resources to ensure that whether it's residential use or energy production through hydro energy, of whether it's coal-fired, gas-fired, nuclear-fired, heating for hydroelectric power. I am in favor of using the Economic Stabilization Fund for one-time expenses.
That's the official name of the rainy day fund.
Right,
so
right.
people know, right?
Because all too often, I mean, people, it's not just a, oh, here's this chunk of dollars that we're keeping over here. The reason it's called the Economic Stabilization Fund is because we run a 2-year budget biennium, but we only meet once out of those 2 years. If the comptroller's estimates aren't accurate or there's a downturn in the economy after we've written the budget, we have the ability to react to it based upon a 2-year budget cycle as opposed to a 1-year budget cycle. We've absolutely got to develop in the water-related arenas more water projects that give us greater acre of feet stockage. While there's some talk of water projects for pipes and other things to replace to prevent losing water, and those are important, those are not as high a priority as having a greater amount of acre feet of stockage of water.
Yeah.
I was out in Amarillo back in the summer at a conference, and for the next 40 years we've got to develop 8 million acre feet of water in addition to what we have the capacity to store right now. And oh, by there's this little thing that says we need to be praying to the Lord to send more rain, because even if we have the holes in the ground,
well, we've just
if
come
He
out
doesn't
of the
send it, I can't hold on to it.
Worst 1-year drought in the history of the state,
Yes, sir.
as we know.
Yes, sir,
right?
absolutely. Now,
So you are for, point is, you are for the idea of using some of the Economic Stabilization Fund to jumpstart the water plant. Correct. Yeah.
With some, and I mean, if you want me to get into the provisos.
Well, but then more generally speaking, because it requires 2/3 of the Senate to vote for and 2/3 of the House to vote for any withdrawals from this fund, you would be a vote yes for water.
Right, but I certainly want, I mean, the strategic answer is yes.
With conditions.
But I want to see how we're going to tighten that shot group to make sure it's not wasted.
More inclined to vote for it than for transportation, or you think that transportation might be a...
I think they're both as critical. Transportation is probably... When you're out of the drought, the water issue is not as in your face as transportation is on a day-to-day basis.
Today, water is
it's in your face because of the drought, but they're both equally important.
Representative, would you be a vote to pull money out for water and transportation?
Water, yes, immediately. I mean, it sustains our populations. It's key.
Right.
And with the education being in the courts, we have a great opportunity. And the way it's set up with Chairman Ritter's bill, I'm all in.
You're all in for it. But transportation, not so much.
No, I mean, we have a big need, and Senator Birdwell alluded to it, with the opening of the Panama Canal and these bigger cargo ships coming through. We're going to have a lot more goods and services on our roads, and we need to do that. So where do we attack that in transportation? You know, we talk about the diversion of the fuel tax, and then we're looking at all these new vehicles that don't stop at the pump. So, you know, where's the point for them to help pay for the roads and maintenance and new roads? So we've got some issues, but we need to figure out.
You are open to a vote to support,
absolutely,
to do that. Doc?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And like the senator was alluding to, as a conservative, we will do that, but there are some stopgaps and there are some controls there, and the cap is an issue we have to be concerned about.
Spending cap.
Spending cap,
Right.
that's right. Yeah. So we would support, I would hope, $2 billion out of the rainy day fund, one-time expenditure, to help with the water development plan, and that is actually an umbrella. It's not designed to be funded all at once. That's an umbrella, revised
And it
every
would be a
5
loan
years.
fund that would be paid back.
That's
also.
right, low-term
revolving loan fund.
Revolving loan fund.
Right,
and transportation infrastructure. And let me say, I'm tickled pink that we have 63 miles of I-35 under construction in the absolute heart of Texas here, in the worst recession in 70 years in this nation. And so,
it's great unless you have to drive on it. Right?
That's right, for the next 2 years. But the downside to that, and we're talking about with transportation, there's over $1 billion a year interest to pay for Prop 12, Prop 14, and the mobility fund. And so we have to find a steady stream for transportation. And so I think a one-time utilization of the Economic Stabilization Fund with the cap in mind, which may dictate how we do it.